Now, let me tell you a little bit about David. First of all, David, should I call you President French, and isn't that kind of weird?
You know, since I was this close to being, like this
It's
close,
amazing.
but not actually, so no, yeah.
And David, the second rule is always pull up your socks when you're on a stage like this. No, you're fine. I have a little trouble here. I've got saggy socks. We can't have that. So tell everybody about how you almost became president.
How did it happen that I became inches from being a footnote in a presidential race? You know, that's an interesting question. So some of you may know who've read my writings. I was on occasion mildly critical of Donald Trump.
Mildly? I thought you were good with words. That's
At
an
all
understated
times,
adjective.
very measured. No, I was critical of Donald Trump for a host of reasons, as a lot of my colleagues were at National Review. And I had a meeting with Bill Kristol in Washington. This was a day or two after Mitt Romney, who very closely looked at whether or not he would mount a third-party run, had looked at it and said no. And I was talking to Bill about, you know, what are the options here? What are you looking at? And he said, you know, it's really interesting. It was Bill and a good friend of mine from law school, just the three of us. And we've done a lot of polling. One of the things that people didn't understand was that Bill's effort to recruit an independent candidate wasn't just Bill brainstorming. There's an election law team that had formed to get a person on ballots. There was pollsters who'd mobilized. There was consultants waiting in the wings, campaign managers waiting in the wings. There was an apparatus that was there. And he said, well, what we had discovered in all of this that we'd been doing was, look, if somebody comes with a particular bio, they're post 9/11 veteran, they come from middle America, not from the Beltway, they've got an interesting background, they can come in, and if people know who they are, if they can get some name recognition, they can just parachute in at 22%. That's how much how much people are discontent. And then if you're on the debate stage, anything can happen. Then it's a true wide open scenario. And I said, well, you know, I think I agree with that in principle. I think that that's something that sounds right to me. And then I had to leave the dinner early. So the following happened unbeknownst to me. After I leave dinner, Bill says to my friend, well, what about David? And my friend, who's my friend, and he thinks excessively highly of me, said...
Ex-friend, it sounds like.
Yeah, he said, yeah, I think that could work. He fits this profile. And so I wake up the next morning, and there is a piece in the Weekly Standard online that says, you know, we don't need a Mitt Romney. We need somebody who's got these characteristics, like my friend David French. And he goes and he describes me. He goes, no, I'm not saying David French is the only candidate or the best candidate, but he's somebody that if America got to know him, they'd like him. Now, I had no idea that was happening, none. And so I was shocked. And then later that day, Bill was talking to me. He says, no, for real, what do you think about it? And, you know, at that time, I was deeply distressed about both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I said, you know, look, I'll think about it. I'll think about it. And I said, let's look at it like, and I don't know if he actually said this, but if he didn't say it, he should have. Brett Favre said that if you're talking about a 2-minute drill, you're not thinking I'm going to score a touchdown. You're thinking I need the next first down. And I said, well, let me just think this through step by step. And he goes, okay, do that. So that's on a Friday. On Saturday, I'm at dinner with my family and some friends, and a tweet descends from the heavens from Bill Kristol that says, there will be a candidate, and he will have a strong team. And he's talking about me, okay? Well, that immediately sets the political world just buzzing. And 4 minutes later, Robert Costa, former National Review reporter, is calling me on my cell phone. I don't answer it. I'm thinking, he just read the Weekly Standard article and put 2 and 2 together, but a whole lot of people hadn't. So all these people are thinking it's Mitt Romney, it's Ben No, it's... Hi, and so I wanted to think about this, And I didn't think I would do it, but I wanted to think about it. I wanted to, run the traps on it. But all of this speculation is swirling, and then and I'm trying not to answer the phone because I don't want my name to leak out. And my phone rings, and one of the core principles that we were run on, if we were going to run, was this campaign would be the one that tells the truth. This would be the one that tells the truth. We're going to present a contrast. So the phone rings, and I think it's National Review, and I pick it up, and it's Mark Halperin. Hey, David, how are you doing? Mark? And I'd never spoken to the man before. No, I'd been on Morning Joe, and he had been on there, but I'd never spoken to him, like, one-on-one. So I have 2 Republican sources saying you're Bill Clinton's man. And I said, oh, really? I don't have anything to say about that. And he said, can I quote you? Quote, I don't have anything to say about that. And I thought, well, that sounds stupid. No, don't do that. I just don't have any comment. And he said, well, here's my quote. 2 Republican sources say that David French is right now considering blah, blah, blah. And then he said, do you deny that's true? And I had this immediate and overwhelming urge to lie. And to say, no, and just buy myself some time. And then I immediately thought, okay, how could it possibly be a campaign based on integrity if the very first act that I undertake as a possible candidate is to lie to the press? So I said, no, I don't deny it. And he goes, in 15 minutes it'll be up, I'll send you the link. It was up in 7 minutes. And the result of that, and I don't want to bore you too much with the story, was at the end of that night, as I was trying to sleep, because I knew the whole world was, the little political world was like, who is David French? I got on Google and I typed in who is, and it auto-completed David French. That's how many people were typing that. And there was even a YouTube montage up by the end of the night of all these news people going, who is David French? But that led to a very hyper-compressed, intense time where, look, I just realized if I had an impact at all, it might be to be the Ralph Nader of 2016, except on the Republican side. And I could not bear the thought that my main impact would be to hand Hillary Clinton the presidency. And so I didn't want any part of that. And I just said no, and I have not regretted it for 1/10 of 1/100th of a second since.
Well, I'd like to think that if you had run and won, that we'd still be sitting here tonight having this conversation.
Oh,
it would just be a little different.
Absolutely. There'd just be a few more people with earpieces around.
Yeah, it'd be a little different. So you already get a sense of just the stature of the man.
Who is David French?
For a minor mishap of humility, would have been president. He is a staff writer at National Review, a senior fellow at the National Review Institute. He's an attorney, concentrating his practice in constitutional law and the law of armed conflict, which I really think that is an interesting phrase. Most importantly, and thank you so much for this, you are a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's lived it. He is the author or co-author of several books. This is the point where I always mention I have also written many books. Most of you haven't heard of them because I never actually typed them out on a computer. Just think about them in my head. He also wrote Rise of ISIS, A Threat We Can't Ignore, graduate of Harvard Law School, which we don't hold against him, past president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, which is a great organization, former lecturer at Cornell Law School, where the students actually learned under, unlike Obama, who was a former lecturer on constitutional law, but apparently did not take the lessons when he was at the University of Chicago. I could go on. Lots of great stuff here. Member of the United States Army Reserve, was deployed in Iraq in 2007, and he was awarded the Bronze Star, which is no small feat. And he lives and works in Colombia with his wife, Nancy. The real reason, by the way, and he has 3 children, the real reason, by the way, he did not run is because his wife, Nancy, actually got a hold of him and said, I'd like to introduce you to my divorce lawyer, and if you go through with this, you'll be having a conversation. Isn't that true?
No. Let me put it this way. A wife who says, you go do this, when her 37-year-old husband says, I feel like I need to join the army and go to Iraq, and she says yes,
Wow.
Trump, maybe running for president is a lesser risk to the family than a deployment. So, yeah, so she was up for it.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
All right, so now I have my questions on my phone, so you all know why I'm looking at the phone here. It's not a grocery list. I'm not texting somebody in the back row. These are the questions because I actually did a little prep work tonight. First of all, how does an intellect like you end up in the hotbed of intellectual conservative thinking, Columbia, Tennessee?
By hotbed of intellectualism in Columbia, Tennessee, you mean, of course, the mule capital of the world.
Exactly.
That's our claim to fame. Don't Google or fact check this because you could burst an entire community's self-conception, but we claim to have more mules per capita than any other community in the United States.
Are you saying that Columbia is a town full of jackasses? Is that?
Oh, no, you're putting words in my mouth now.
I'm pretending I'm in the media.
So we do actually have a claim to fame. We helped defeat the Soviet Union, no lie. In the Afghan war in the 1980s, the Russian helicopter, the Soviet helicopters were punishing the Mujahideen. They had no answer for them. We needed to send Stinger missiles over the mountain ranges, and the donkeys that the Mujahideen had were not hardy or substantial enough to carry Stinger missiles. So we sent Columbia mules and American Stinger missiles, and the Colombian mules carried the missiles over the mountain range and fortunately died off before they could be used against us, many years later in our own war in Afghanistan.
That is an amazing story. Have any of you ever heard that story before? I've never heard that story
It's
before.
verifiable. It's in Charlie Wilson's War. You can read it, yes.
Wow, I saw the movie. I only remember the hot tub scenes, though. Speaking of that sort of thing, there's been a lot of talk about unmasking. And when I think of unmasking, I can only think of Nicole Kidman in Eyes Wide Shut. But I think you're talking about a more dangerous kind of unmasking.
Yeah, oh boy, okay, we're going to crack open the Pandora's box of the Russia controversy. I had a really good time earlier this week. Andy McCarthy, who's one of our senior fellows at NRI and a longtime writer at the magazine, he and I talked about this whole thing. What is unmasking? And let me back up a minute. If you're going to talk about the Russia controversy, I think there are two questions that have to be answered. And we don't know the answer to these two questions. One of them is, was there any collusion between members of the Trump campaign team and members and elements of Russian intelligence during the course of the campaign? We don't have any evidence right now that there was. If leaks are correct, we have evidence that there was contact, but the contact isn't the same thing as collusion. So that's a question. A very, very important question that deserves full investigation. Here's another question. Was there an effort by members of the Obama administration and permanent members of the national security bureaucracy and civil service to engage in improper or possibly unlawful surveillance of the Trump campaign during the campaign and afterwards in the transition period? That's another question. And so both of those are really important questions. Both of those could involve abuses of power. Both of those could involve serious misconduct and wrongdoing. Now, what does unmasking mean? So here, where does unmasking come in? So here's, without diving too much into the weeds, the way the system works, if our national security establishment is doing what it is supposed to do, it is going to have under surveillance known foreign agents. Known members of Russian intelligence, known members of intelligence agencies from other nations, known people who are considered to be important in our own intelligence gathering activities. Now, these are, so you're surveilling a foreigner. Well, frequently, Americans talk to foreigners, right? So what happens is, to avoid there from being some sort of surveillance state aspect to this, when there are intelligence reports of American contacts with foreigners, let me just make it super easy. Let's imagine a thoroughly benign contact. So I'm contacting a person in Russia that I might know through various friend-to-friend business dealings. I have no idea they're part of Russian intelligence, but I think they might have the hookup for some ballet tickets. Not that I am interested in Russian ballet, but I hear they do it well. So that's just an example. And so the report would be, American A contacted Boris and asked for ballet tickets. Well, there's no reason to know who that American is because there's nothing wrong with looking for ballet tickets. So that protects the American's privacy as these reports are circulated in the national security establishment. So that's one example. Then there's another one. Let's say it's American B contacts Boris and has cruise missile plans to share. Well, you would immediately want to know who American B was. And to know who the American B was, you unmask them. You remove the anonymity. So when you have the anonymity, that's called minimizing. When you remove the anonymity, that's called unmasking. Now, here's where this gets more interesting. Unmasking is normally, to prevent abuse, unmasking is normally a function that is not done by the political branches of the national security establishment. So the national security advisor, who is a political appointee, is not normally the person who's asking for unmasking. Now, that's not to say it's improper in all times for the national security advisor to ask. Often another set of eyes can look at it and say, I need to know who this person is for these reasons. Normally, the unmasking decision is made by professional members of the national security establishment in accordance with standard operating procedures and common practices. So here's the unmasking scandal in a nutshell. Did Susan Rice, for example, or other members of the political branches of the national security establishment improperly and excessively ask to unmask the identities of Trump administration officials, GOP officials, you name it, as part of an effort to determine their activities and to possibly embarrass them or to spread negative information about them in the press? That's a very, very, very important question, because if the answer to that is yes, then that's a grade A political scandal. That's a major political scandal.
But David, there would have to be negative information about Trump administration officials in the press, and it's been nothing but fawning since the inauguration.
Oh, I know. Well, see, they were trying to cut against the overwhelmingly positive coverage. No, so that's a serious question. And one worth investigating and exploring. Now, there's a circumstance where there could be systematic unmasking, and it's correct. And that circumstance could be if there was actual collusion and there was evidence of collusion. So a lot of people's default feeling about this scandal depends on who do you trust. So there are Democrats who would say, I think the Trump administration is rotten to its very core. So when I hear that Susan Rice was making a lot of unmasking requests, I think, good, she's getting to the bottom of it. You talk to Republicans and they say, well, whoa. This Obama administration wiretapped reporters, targeted the Tea Party, was demonstrated again and again that it would abuse its own powers to prod and poke into the lives of Americans, lied about surveillance of Americans. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. So by default, I'm going to kind of not trust Susan Rice. I mean, Susan Rice on the spotlight in the biggest moment of her national security life, she lied about what happened in Benghazi. So why am I going to trust her? I don't trust her as far as I can throw her. And so, but what's critical to remember, regardless of your level of trust either way, is we don't yet know the underlying facts. And that's what's so frustrating about this. I tend to believe that we need to start declassifying some of these documents so that we're not relying on improper leaks, second-hand, third-hand description of documents, run through leaks and reporters. Let's see the documents. Now, there's some documents that will have to always remain classified because they might, just revealing the document would reveal sources and methods and things like this. But that's one of the things, and every time I talk about this Russian scandal, I'm potentially really outraged. Potentially. I don't yet know enough. I do know that there's some improper leaking going on, and that's got to be, that has to be investigated. But beyond that, I'm potentially really angry, but not angry yet.
And what do you think about the theory that they actually used the British spy services and the guy, I want to say it's Hannigan, who abruptly was running their spy agency, who abruptly and sort of unexpectedly resigned. There's some thought that they started the back door to create a predicate to get the FISA warrants by having a friendly agency do this. What do you think of that theory?
Who the heck knows?
By the way, if you hear any loud noise, it's the black helicopters landing on the roof.
So that's the sinister, there's a sinister explanation for that, which is there was an exploitation of the greater freedom of British intelligence to kind of do an end run around our own systems. And then there's the benign explanation, which is British intelligence doing its job as it was supposed to do, uncovered things that caused them to alert American intelligence. It's the same thing as a lot of the arguments about unmasking. So here's the sinister explanation of, I just went through some of the sinister explanations that a lot of there was unmasking and spreading of information in an effort to plant in the media and throughout the government negative information about Trump or create suspicions about Trump. That's the negative. There was the flip side explanation is because there was negative information discovered about Trump, that there are people within the national security establishment who spread information about it through multiple channels so that a Trump administration couldn't come in and vacuum it all up and quash it. So again, it goes back to what are the facts here? What are the facts? And the problem is because we don't know the facts, we're left with, well, I'm presuming the Obama administration did something wrong because they've done something wrong in the past, or people saying, I'm presuming Donald Trump's team did something wrong because of Paul Manafort's past ties with Russia, or Michael Flynn's financial arrangements with Russia. But again, the bottom line is we don't know the facts. And so I wrote this really long, 2,000-word explainer about this whole controversy, and it's called A Beginner's Guide to the Russia Controversy. And I did it in a Q&A form, and at the end, last question was, so you're telling me we don't really know anything important. Isn't this the most useless explainer ever written? But I'm sorry, that's where we are. On the fundamental underlying facts of the matter, we don't yet know.
So I'll predict that one day it will come out, and this is going to be one of the greatest abuses of power we've seen in a long time, because I don't believe in coincidences. Let's change subjects. Chelsea Clinton seems very popular all of a sudden. I don't quite understand it. And the obsession with the left with the Clintons. Let's think about the Clintons for a moment. Bill becomes president in 1992. Democrats have control of everything. He leaves, they've lost the House, they've lost by 2002 they lose the Senate, they lost the Senate, got it back for a while, but anyway, so eventually Republicans have total control under the Bush administration. Tight, but nevertheless. Yeah. And of course, the Republicans lose it all in 06. But nevertheless, the Clinton era, though a good economic era, was not exactly great politically for Democrats. And then Mrs. Clinton runs what is now, I think, generally acknowledged to be one of the worst campaigns, if not the worst presidential campaign in the history of the country, certainly the modern era. And yet they can't seem to break up with them. What's going on?
They just can't quit the Clintons. Will you all permit me some dime store psychobabble here?
We specialize in that, so we eat that up like candy.
So there's a couple of things in play here. One, Bill Clinton in the impeachment battle took on and beat Newt Gingrich, basically, who was that era's Republican public enemy #1. So you think by 2000, Bill Clinton he was elected in 92, he was reelected in a landslide in 96. In 2000, he has, 60% approval rating. I don't know if y'all remember the Democratic convention in 2000 when Clinton takes this long WWE wrestler-style entrance to come to speak.
With the camera down low.
It was unbelievable.
Looking up at him.
I mean, only The Rock would have better cinematography for an entrance than. And so there was this view that he was he was also the giant slayer, because think about the dry spell the Democrats had had. They had lost in 68, they had lost in 72. In 76, they squeak one out with Jimmy Carter, and they got Jimmy Carter, okay? Then they get blown out in 80, they get blown out of the stratosphere in 84, they get blown out in 88. So Bill Clinton was the guy. I mean, you heard all this talk about the blue wall in 2016. Brother, there was a red wall, and he and Clinton penetrated. So there's all this goodwill and affection. And then, the problem is, it was Bill Clinton's affection. It did not transfer to her. She was all of the corruption and none of the charm. If you grew up in the South like I did, you're familiar with the Bill Clinton character. He's the guy who's going to walk into the room, and he's trying to sleep with your wife, but you kind of like him anyway. Like, no, Bill, you can't have her, but let's talk some football, And she had none of that. But then the other thing was, there was some real scandal fatigue around the Clintons, and it cost, I think, in a large degree, cost Gore the election in 2000. But then you fast forward to 2016, and we're all at this point familiar with the shock and rage and fear that the left feels as a result of the Trump victory. I mean, #resistance, like, give me a break. Like, this is the French, they're going to launch the French Revolution, But if you're going to label Trump the ultimate evil, which they're doing, what do you want to be? You want to be on the side of good, okay? So, but if you're going to look honestly at the 2016 race, how are you going to mount up that moral high horse? I mean, really, you served America, the least liked politician in the history of likability polling, with the only competitor, Donald Trump, in the unlikability factor, a person who, and I've never heard anyone argue this effectively counter to what I say, that if her name was Captain Clinton instead of Secretary Clinton, would be in jail for mishandling classified information. A member of the military who did what she did, and I'm sure there are veterans in this room who have had security clearances, you darn well know what would have happened to her. Her best case scenario would have been a dishonorable discharge. Her normal case scenario would be some form of prison. That's who they served to the American people. But how do you look in the mirror and say we're on the side of the angels when we served Hillary to the American people? You have to whitewash Hillary. Here's my psychobabble. You have to make her something that she's not. The brave feminist warrior who was going to shatter the glass ceiling until an army of bigots and misogynists stopped her. So that's why we saw Hillary in the woods, and she seemed so wise and sad. It's like this fascination with her. And you're like, wait a minute, guys, this is one of the most corrupt politicians of the modern era. And you're like, was it Christoph who in this Women's Day interview, kind of like we're having here, said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I mean, no, I don't recall
I'm fine. You just have to learn to get through it, and that you're fighting for the American people and the children.
Yeah, so it's, I think it's the product of the polarized times that we're in. It's really hard to look your own side in the mirror and look at yourself in the mirror and say, we screwed up. Now, there are a lot of Bernie fans out there looking at the rest of the Democratic establishment and saying, you screwed up, and have none of this affection for Hillary. There are little signs that there's data and then there's experience. And one of the reasons why people like me, I gave Trump about a 30% chance of winning on an interview the day before the election, which was higher than most people were giving him, but still only 30%. There are things that I should have seen earlier that I should have noticed. One was the affection that Trump had built amongst his core fans. So in my community, it's Trump country, brothers and sisters. 72% of my precinct voted for Trump. I bought a Toyota Tundra. Every writer needs a Toyota Tundra to haul all those words. And I was talking to my truck salesman, and he goes, well, what do you do? And I said, I'm a writer. He goes, a writer, like novels? I said, I'm not nearly that talented. I write about politics. And he said, are you a conservative? And there's only one answer to that question in Columbia, Tennessee. And I said, yeah, I'm a conservative. And he said, well, can I Google you? And I said, sure. I said, wait a minute. Do you like Donald Trump? I love him. I said, wait on the Googling. And I just said, out of curiosity, why do you like Trump so much? And he said, because he loves America and he kicks ass. And I thought, if that's the message that gets through, man, that's a messaging masterpiece. So here you have, that's a powerful message. That's hope and change for, for rural red America. Then I had this, not 3 or 4 days later, I'm on a Southwest flight, and I'm sitting next to a Bernie bro. And he's trying to sell me on socialized medicine.
Did he have a man bun?
No, he didn't. He didn't. He had flowing locks of hair, and tattoos. Awesome guy, by the way. We had exactly the same taste in movies and video games, but not politics. And we're having a conversation, and he starts talking about Hillary. And he's not using his airplane voice. You know, when you talk politics on an airplane, you don't want to inflict it on everybody else. He's inflicting it. And a woman gets up from 5 rows away, walks over, doesn't look at him, looks at me and says, don't you believe a word he's saying about Hillary, she's the best. And then goes and sits down. And I realized there might be a greater schism here than people are realizing. And it turns out there was a Never Hillary movement. There was. It was just called 5 million people not showing up to the polls instead of 5 pundits saying don't vote for Hillary. Yeah.
This is the mandatory point in any kind of public conversation that I'm involved with where I get to say, I predicted Trump would win in April.
Did you?
I did. And
is that in writing anywhere?
It's absolutely in writing. In fact, the team wouldn't let me try to get it published because they thought I would look like such an idiot. Now, they were right about the idiot part, but they were wrong about the Trump thing. It's a whole interesting story as to why about blew all down and some of the underlying data. The short version is I just thought nobody would ever be able to put together Obama's coalition again with the extraordinary numbers of the 4 key demographic groups. Nobody was going to be able to do that again, and especially not Hillary. And then the other side of the coin, of course, was non-voting white males that Trump was appealing to. Yeah. Just to give you an illustration very quickly, in Illinois, the 4 big demographic groups, blacks, Latinos, single women, millennials, which Obama dominated and carried him to the presidency, a number from about 695,000 to 1,095,000. That's the range of the number of votes cast in 2012. 1.6 million white males in Illinois did not vote in 2012. Right. You don't need very many of them if you're Donald Trump to just move the needle just enough in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and almost got Minnesota. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic. But about Bernie and the Democrats, one of the things I've been fascinated by is this schism on the Democrat Party. The conservative side, the Republican side, has many problems, and the idea that there will now be this permanent Republican majority is delusional. It is very thin and challenging. But I think the Democrats have real problems, and they are thinking, if I were to predict it, if the current trends continue, which is always dangerous, the Bernie wing has very little chance, I believe, of putting an electoral map back together again. What are they doing?
What are they doing? Well, one of the things that they have not yet understood that they cannot win the presidency by winning California by greater margins. And so what you essentially have is a movement right now that's in the middle of one of these sort of ideological struggle sessions that is essentially saying, well, we just need to be more ideologically pure, turn out more of our core people. Well, we know their core people, that's the urban centers of the blue states in this country. And so you churn out more people in Manhattan and San Francisco and LA and Chicago, that does not move the ball. You could win the popular vote by 6 million, by 7 million, by 8 million. That does not move the ball. And so that hasn't sunk in quite yet, I don't think. And you see it in a lot of the hype that you're seeing about these off-year elections. look, guys, if a $5 donor, a normal $5 donor gives $15, and a normal election day voter votes 4 days before the election, that's not really progress. So they have not demonstrated yet that they've expanded their coalition. They've mainly demonstrated that they've made their coalition angrier and more scared.
I think that's one of the, I agree with that. I think one of the biggest myths of what's going on in these special elections is the idea that they're surging. Now, these off-year elections are always turnout elections, and it's always the side that just lost that is really angry, and they turn out, where the side that just won goes back to sleep.
Right.
So it's all about the turnout. If you actually dig into the numbers, there's less to worry about. I mean, there's things to worry about, but less to worry about if you're worried about Republicans.
But one thing I would just add, I think the Democrats will not truly engage in soul searching unless they lose another presidential election. Because if you talk about the Republicans, remember between 2008 and 2012, it wasn't until 2012 that people really began to press the panic button. 2008, there was a lot of thought, well, Obama, he's a product of the Great Recession and discontent with the Iraq War. He ran as sort of this hope change, post-ideological, uniting figure. 2012, he runs as Barack Obama, and he wins, and then people were like, oh, this is a real thing. And so I think the Democrats, if they're able to win and beat Trump in 2020, there won't be that soul searching. There will just be, that was the aberration. The explanation for 2016 is Hillary Clinton. That's the explanation for 2016. So I think we're a few years away from the Democrats, and they may never do it because who knows, they may win the next time around. This was a really close election.
Let's change subjects a little bit to free speech. I think one of the things I find absolutely stunning is the attacks on free speech in general, and there's multiple ways this is happening. It's not just attacks on free speech through the trying to roll back Citizens United, political speech, money in politics, which when I wear my Citizen John hat, I'm very involved in, and I raise a lot of money for elections. And and the way I've always seen it, money is speech, and if you're outside trying to challenge the powers that are on the inside, you need more money because they have all the advantages of incumbency. So you have that. Then you have the intimidation tactics of crushing speech, boycotting companies, what just happened to O'Reilly. Whatever you think of O'Reilly, the real reason he was let go was because sponsors were pulling out of his show. So it was the money that eventually created the impetus for Fox to take the move. This has been going on for a long time. Why did they do it now? Because they were starting to lose sponsors. They were losing sponsors because of intimidation on those sponsors' speech to advertise their products. And then, of course, you have the bizarre world that is college campuses. What happened to the left? How did they become the intolerant party?
Okay, so what happened to the left is human nature, all right? It is an aberration to have a political movement that is liberty-minded. That's why we have our fundamental freedoms protected in the Bill of Rights, because the founders did not trust political majorities to protect individual liberty. There is a universal human temptation when you attain power or when you seek power to trample liberty. So what happened to the left? I think the left is reverting to the mean of human behavior, which is the norm of human behavior is you seek power and you don't necessarily value individual liberty unless individual liberty gives you power. Now, there's an intellectual foundation for that, though, and this is what we're seeing on college campuses in spades, all right? I promise I'm not going to put you to sleep. But I'm going to refer to a 1965 essay by a German-American philosopher. Hang with me, okay? It's called Repressive Tolerance by a guy named Herbert Marcuse. And essentially what he...
wait a minute. How many have read that already? How many? Anybody?
Hey, we've got some people who've read it in here.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised you've read it.
So essentially his thesis is that if you're seeking social change, tolerance, as normal human beings define tolerance, furthers repression. And here's how. So if you're seeking social change and you allow all points of view to be shared equally, what point of view will be shared the most? The dominant point of view, the majority point of view. And so what ends up happening is minority points of view, social justice, social change, revolutionary points of view are lost. Because in normal tolerance, normal free marketplace of ideas, they're going to be drowned out, they're going to be shouted out, they're going to lose. So he said that's repressive tolerance. So what you need is, and this is classic Orwellian language, liberating tolerance. Okay, well, what is liberating tolerance? Liberating tolerance is that tolerance which privileges the left point of view at the expense of the right point of view. And he said something that this is the way to break the logjam, to get the revolutionary ideas in the bloodstream, is to suppress the conservative, the reactionary, the right ideas, and liberate the left. Now, so that's liberating tolerance. And he lamented in this essay, so this is 1965, it's before the big anti-war movements, there's no instrument that has power in society that can implement liberating tolerance. The government won't, the academy won't, there's no power. Well, guess what? There's an awful lot of people in the academy who read these kinds of things, who had power and then as the 60s and the upheaval of the 60s and the 70s and the radicals got tenure, guess who started having power? Those who had read and imbibed this notion of liberating revolutionary tolerance. And so it became intolerance in the name of liberating tolerance. Suppressing conservative views, elevating revolutionary views, and using the instruments and the power of the academy and other important cultural institutions to do this. So that played out over time, and it even began to play out in policy. So this is how you get some of the weird academic doublespeak. So I actually sued Penn State University. There was a time when I think I had the title of suing more universities than any living lawyer, which I wear with pride.
We should applaud that.
I mean,
really, we should applaud that.
I sued Penn State because it had a speech code. A speech code is a policy that suppresses speech that's protected by the First Amendment. And here was the key provision of the speech code. Now, don't think too hard about this, or it will create a logic loop that will tear a hole in the space-time continuum and end the universe, okay? Acts of intolerance will not be tolerated.
Okay, so now I have to tell you, I mentioned this to you earlier, I had a professor in college who said to me once, I remember exactly where I was standing in the hallway, he said, John, the only thing to be intolerant in life is intolerance itself. And I still don't know what the hell that means.
That's Marcuse. He's channeling, he's having a seance with Herbert Marcuse. This is liberating tolerance, which does not tolerate repressive tolerance, which is the normal marketplace of ideas that we've established in this country. Now, okay, now I'm going to really veer into crazy town. So you have this Marcusean notion of liberating intolerance, and his basic view was, well, how do you know what is liberating intolerance or liberating tolerance versus repressive tolerance? And he said, well, it's empirical. You know, all these old Marxists sort of had this view of life as being kind of scientific. You could figure all this out scientifically. Well, it's just empirical. People who are fair-minded empiricists can look at competing political ideas and know which ones to privilege and know which ones to suppress. Well, we don't have that anymore. So instead we have this thing called intersectionality. Okay, how many of you here have heard the word intersectionality? Okay, a minority of the room. Everyone needs to know this word because this is the instrument of censorship. Intersectionality, for lack of a better way of describing it, is essentially the idea that oppression operates in what are called cross-hatching ways across identity groups. So therefore, if you are an African American man, you are oppressed in the category of your race, but you are privileged in the category of your gender. If you are an African American woman, you are oppressed in the category of your race. You are oppressed in the category of your gender. If you're an African American lesbian woman, you are oppressed across these cross-hatching multiple ways. If you are an African American lesbian trans woman, the level of oppression is beginning to hit the red line. You hit a level of like physical disability on top of that, and it's just red. And so what ends up happening is that the experience of the oppressed is to be credited and validated in determining speech and policy. And the more oppressed you are, the more authority that you have. And the responsibility of the progressives who do not experience this intersectional oppression, their responsibility is to be an ally of the oppressed. Now, why is this even more dangerous in some ways than Marcuse's notion of empirically determining these political questions? Here's why. Because if the experience of the oppressed dictates the terms of the debate, it's entirely subjective and up to the mood of the person. So we got two guys here, Douglas and Craig. Let's make this concrete. Let's say, Douglas, I don't know how you're intersectionally oppressed, but you're intersectionally oppressed in some way. And so are you, Craig. But Douglas, something about your upbringing has given you a thick skin. So we're having an argument about Trump, and I say, you know what? I like that he dropped the Moab in Afghanistan. Y'all know what the Moab is? Okay. I like that he dropped the Moab in Afghanistan. And you think, you know what? I don't, and here's why. And we have a rational conversation. I leave that conversation and go, well, that's fast. This is fascinating. This is why I came to college. Douglas and I disagree, but you know, that was a great Moab talk. So I go to Craig and I say, you know, I was just talking to your friend Douglas, and I like that I dropped the Moab, that Trump dropped the Moab. What do you think about that? And Craig just loses it. Tears are streaming down his face. He's furious. He's angry because something I said triggered something about his marginalized past or present or the identity group which he identifies with, and then there is hell to pay for me because poor Craig's feelings are hurt, he feels marginalized, and all of you people around here who are not oppressed like Craig have a responsibility to be his ally immediately. So instead of a friendly discussion now, this is a mob right here in the quad. You're screaming at me, you're yelling at me, and I did nothing other than talk to Craig exactly the way I talked to Douglas. Do you see how this begins to spiral out of control? This is why even liberal professors are saying, I'm terrified of my leftist students because I don't know their sensitivities. This actually happened at Claremont McKenna College. There was a dean who said, I'm trying to help students, and he was referring to a non-traditional student, I believe, somebody who didn't go straight out of high school to college, who don't fit the CMC mold. And the fact that she referred to a student as not fitting the mold hurt that student's feelings so much that literally there was a campus upheaval to destroy the career of this woman who was only trying to help somebody because you hurt the feelings of the person who had the experiential authority under intersectionality to assert her quote-unquote pain, and everyone had a responsibility to be their ally, and boom, that dean is gone. And that's what's happening, and it's crazy.
So what do we do about it?
Well, one of the things you have to do is you have to say, that's crazy, okay? Like, now I'm a big believer in civility and treating people with dignity and respect, but sometimes you just have to say, okay, I think this is really off, and here's why. And the other thing you have to do is you have to have and demonstrate the courage of your convictions in a difficult environment. Because, you see, and this goes to the main threat to free speech in the United States is not the government. Now, the government There are things governments are doing that can threaten free speech. Yes, there's no question about that. But where the law is right now is pretty solid. A good First Amendment attorney rarely loses a case because the law's on their side, not because they're brilliant, because the law's on their side. But what we have is a cultural problem here where people are afraid to raise their voice to say anything because of the personal and the professional risk that they experience. So, you know, when I went to law school, I left a little Christian school in Nashville called Lipscomb University. I already met a couple people in here who've heard of Lipscomb, but most people around in the North don't know. Most of you Yankees don't know Lipscomb. So anyway, it's a very conservative Christian school, especially 25, 30 years ago, very conservative. So that was my college experience. Wonderful school. I went to law school at, up north at Harvard, and then it was different, okay? One of the first things that I experienced was I formed a student club called the Society for Law, Life, and Religion. And I went to Harvard looking forward to being in the ideological minority. I wanted to match wits with the best that there was in the legal profession. I couldn't wait for that. So one of the first things I did is I formed with two other guys a group called the Society for Law, Life, and Religion, which was dedicated to religious liberty and pro-life causes. And we wrote a letter to the whole student body, and we said, Harvard has a policy that requires you to pay for elective abortions with your student health fee. But if you have a conscientious objection to abortion, you can write a letter, and you can get a refund of that portion of your fee that typically goes to abortion services. It's a good policy that Harvard has. It allows you to opt out of that industry. And so I wrote a very nice letter to all 1,500 students, ran off 1,500 copies. This was before email. I know it was nice because I niced it down like 3 layers from my first couple of drafts. And I sent it and I made a mistake. I put on there, if you want to take advantage of this opportunity, tear off the sheet at the bottom and return it to David French, certain box, you know. So I hand out everything in the evening, study, go to classes. In the afternoon, I walk up to my box, and it is jammed with paper, jammed. And I think, I just tapped into the latent pro-life movement at Harvard Law School. Okay, I'm just—
You're such a dreamer.
Yeah, that was before all of the idealism had been sucked out of my body. But I go and I open the first piece of paper, and it says, "Why don't you go die, you effing fascist?" Now, these are the future leaders of our country. And just to give you a sense, Barack Obama and Neil Gorsuch were the class before me. Ted Cruz came in the next year, and I'm the total underachiever in between. So these are literally, future leaders of the country. Why don't you go die? Next one, go die. Next one, you're a fascist. Now, let's be clear. I don't want to exaggerate. These were not death threats. They were death aspirations. I'm not going to kill you. I just want somebody to do it. And I got shouted down in class. I got my own professor in one class shouted me down, screaming, "Ah!" And I was just being a normal human conservative being. I mean, and it was just screaming and yelling. And very few, you know what happens in that environment? Very few people speak. If you say the cost of the reality when you speak is you're going to get shouted down by your peers and hated and reviled, very few people are going to speak in that environment. And that's what's happening now. Social media, Twitter, corporations. If you go and you work at Facebook in Silicon Valley, and you're a gun-toting social conservative, and you sit in a cubicle next to a gun-controlling social liberal, do you think you're going to have an equal ability to talk about your personal views? Or do you think you might microaggress half the office if you bring, like, say, a Second Amendment sticker into the office? There's not an equal playing field in these very critical areas, so that people who have conservative points of view, particularly socially conservative points of view, do not enjoy the same economic opportunities in this country if they speak their minds as people who are socially liberal. Pardon?
Sort of like living in Chicago.
Yeah, like living in Chicago is what he said, yes.
I wish that wasn't true. So, the left, when the left was the Woodstock generation, free love, free drugs, free this, free that. Now all they seem to want to talk about is free contraception. How does the right, besides standing up, how do we begin to fight back to these fight back against these institutions? Well, actually, let me back up for a half a second. What I think is amazing, given all that we just talked about, is our side still actually competes and wins in the political arena. So they have all these advantages. They have academia, they have the media, they have popular culture, they have a lot of governmental infrastructure, they have the deep state, on, and yet they barely win when they do win, and the right still occasionally ekes one out. Think what we could do if we were better competitors for mind share and for the public narrative, and we really do have a war in culture.
Yeah.
How do we start winning the war? And I'm not talking about the 80s war in culture. I'm talking about what we're talking about
Right.
now.
You know, that's a great question. I mean, there's a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways to do it. And I want to say we're winning just as you said, we're winning a lot. There are areas where I have seen dramatic progress in positive ways, and I don't want to go back to the Second Amendment again because that's like triggering for you guys in Chicago. But see
what he did there, trigger?
Yeah, I think like 9 people hated it and everyone else groaned. And so there's been a major cultural change in the United States regarding the Second Amendment in a positive direction. I mean, heck, in Tennessee, where I live, they practically issue you a firearm when you cross the border. But there's a lot that goes along with that about notions of personal independence, what it means to be a responsible citizen, how much distance there should be between the citizen and the state. There's a lot of cultural stuff that's wrapped up in that, which is one of the reasons why the left hates even peaceful, law-abiding gun ownership so much, because it carries with it a sense of independence. And you're no longer completely dependent on the state in the areas that are most important to you, your physical and bodily integrity and safety. And, so we do win a lot of things, but here's what we have to do. Number one, we have to commit to re-infiltrating leftist institutions. We cannot say Harvard is for them, Hillsdale is for us. We can't do that. We can't say Facebook is for them, and I don't know, do we have something else? Snapchat is for us? No.
Reader's Digest.
Yeah. We cannot do that. I speak to young lawyers all the time. I say, you know what we don't need? We don't need, if I've got 40, it used to be I would walk into a room and there'd be 40 conservative lawyers, and I'd say, how many of you guys want to work for major corporations or law firms? No hands would raise. How many of you want to do what I do, like work for public interest law firms suing the left or writing a National Review? Every hand would go up. I'd say, no, I don't need the competition, but what we need are conservatives on the board of Facebook. What we need are conservatives in boardrooms. What we need are conservatives in Hollywood. So re-infiltrate these institutions and do so not from a standpoint of entitlement, hey, I'm conservative, hire me, but hey, I'm really darn good at what I do, and I'm going to earn this seat at this table, and once I have the seat at this table, there's a lot of good after effects from that. So that's very important. You can't, but we have to be realistic. There's not going to be waves of conservatives migrating and dominating Silicon Valley, so you have to build competing conservative institutions as well. So that's what National Review is. We didn't leave the world of ideas to the New Republic and to the New York Times. William F. Buckley said, we're going to compete in the world of ideas by building an enduring institution, intellectual institution that is committed to excellence and to formulating and debating a comprehensive conservative worldview. And we've been doing it for more than 60 years and deeply impacted the culture with a competing institution. That's critically important. And here's what you don't do. You don't fight the culture war over the long term with a culture of celebrity. By finding famous voices and adoring them and following what they say. Now, it's not to say that there isn't a need for famous conservatives and thoughtful conservatives, but a culture of celebrity is not the same thing as institution building. It's not the same thing as institution infiltrating. So that's what this is. You know, the left has a term. It's called the Long March, based on Mao's long march through China, which ultimately helped him win the Chinese Civil War and take over China from the Chinese nationalists and turn it communist. And there's been a long march of the left through cultural institutions. And here's what I found in the conservative world. When I'll talk to a book publisher or I'll talk on a radio show, people will say, oh, that's really interesting how you've diagnosed the problems in the culture. Can you give me a 4-step fix to this? You know, that's what everyone's looking for. What's the 5-point plan for fixing the nation? You know, and my counter is we need our own long march. You know, they march through cultural institutions. Marches go both ways. History doesn't have a direction. History doesn't have a side. We can march back, and that's what we have to do. And there's people here in this room who are in critical commercial and cultural and educational institutions who you right now are already part of the solution. You just need allies. There needs to be more. And this is a message we got to be sending to conservative young people in this country.
Excellent answer. And with that, we will now open it up to the audience questions. Eric is in the back, and since he organized the thing, he's given me the big wave. Yes, Eric? We have microphones, I'm told. Microphones.
David, you spoke that the college campus is a breeding ground of a lot of the free speech problem. I read a study recently that said for kids born today, in this year, 18 years from now, the cost of a college education is going to be $500,000.
Right.
How much do you think that this universe that is, to me, ripe for disruption because of the inflated cost of all of it and the diminishing value of all of it may affect this free speech problem that is kind of percolating on campuses?
The market, you cannot continue to raise college prices above the rate of wage increase and above the rate of inflation indefinitely. I like what my colleague Jim Garrity says, that which cannot go on forever won't. We saw that in the housing bubble. I mean, prices of homes were rising above the rate of wage increase, above the rate of inflation considerably for year after year after year. It couldn't go on forever, and it didn't.
I'm looking forward to that happening in government.
Yeah, well, government unfortunately can print money as well. But so there's going to be a market correction here, and we're already beginning to see some of it in the online experience. So Liberty University, which years ago started as a sleepy little Baptist college in Lynchburg, Virginia, is now one of the largest universities in the total number of students that it educates in the United States because of its online program. So that's going to be a real competition. But I'll tell you what's worrisome to me. That will never really threaten Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Stanford. There's always going to be a market for the quote-unquote elite universities, the children of the elite, the aspiring elite who are going to go there, go to those schools, imbibe those ideas, and then have disproportionate advantages moving from those institutions out into the commercial world, out into the world of the arts, out into the world of government. And that's one reason why we have to be there in force, because the market won't correct Harvard. Harvard is wealthier than lots of countries. There's always going to be a market for people who want to go to Harvard, Yale, Columbia. It's always going to have an outsized voice in our culture. It's increasing even. With the power and the rise of Silicon Valley, a lot of these guys, they're not the rebels you think they are. They're the children of the technocratic, meritocratic elite in the United States who just, instead of heading to Wall Street, are heading over to Silicon Valley and putting on a hoodie instead of a suit and tie. It's the same people. So we have got to penetrate these institutions.
All right, next question. We'll go right here in front with a microphone. Right here in front.
So first of all, thank you for being here. And second, as a member of the fourth estate, how would you evaluate your colleagues, and what is the future of what was really meant to be a voice for the populace?
So, okay. I'm different from some conservative writers in that I don't hate the mainstream media. I think they're a product of their environment. There are people in the mainstream media who I think are just flat out biased, have an agenda. I think the larger reality of what we have is the result of ideological cocooning. And so they aren't really even able to fully understand America in its breadth and depth. They just don't. They can't, because they're walled off. Big-time mainstream journalistic enterprises these days tend to draw from small pools of elite educational institutions that are heavily dominated by the left. Where do they live? They live in major urban areas that are less ideologically diverse than churches. True statement. You can look it up. Major urban areas in the United States voted more for Clinton than the broader evangelical vote voted for Trump. Think about that. And so they're products of a cocooned and walled off environment. And so I'm going to give you I did this earlier today in an interview, but I'm going to give you a fake math equation that will help explain the world. All right, you've heard of fake news? This is fake math. Okay. LGP equals I squared. Okay. LGP, what is LGP? It is the law of group polarization. What is that? If you remember nothing from what I say tonight, remember this. The law of group polarization is the phenomenon where when people of a like mind gather, the common expression of their shared beliefs becomes more and more extreme. So in other words, when people of the same point of view get together, just as a natural result of people agreeing with each other, they tend to be more committed and more firm in their views and less open to discussion and debate. This is what's happened on college campuses. This is what's happening to a large degree in newsroom. It's called the law of group polarization. And what does that equal? I squared. Ignorance and intolerance. It breeds ignorance and intolerance. So what's the ignorance? When they're surrounded and cocooned off, they'll often, all that they'll know about conservative thought is what they read liberals saying about conservative thought. You know, when I was in law school, a highly cocooned environment, I was a normal conservative. I wasn't like some sort of brilliant, cutting-edge conservative thinker. I would like listen to Rush Limbaugh and say some of that stuff in class, you know? And they would say, I've never heard anything like that before. And these are Princeton grads, Stanford, Yale, never heard. And then they find out I'm a Southern evangelical. I've never met one of you before. You know, like I had just landed from Mars. So there's the ignorance. You don't understand the point of view, you don't understand the culture, you don't understand where they're coming from, and then what does that breed? Intolerance. If you don't see the value or understand the value in the person in the speech, you're intolerant of that person in that speech. And so I think what you have are an awful lot of newsrooms in the United States that are in the grips of that whole phenomenon. There are people that if you put them in a different context, in a different place, would be fine, but they're products of their environment. I get along great as a human being with an awful lot of people on MSNBC or CNN that I really, really disagree with. I also understand that they're products of their environment. It's a rare person who can really rise above it. Like Jake Tapper, for example, is an example of a journalist who's able to, and I don't even know what his politics are, but he's able to hold both sides' feet to the fire. So that's what I think is, I think what we have is a product of ideological cocooning. You see the same thing on college campuses, you see the same thing in newsrooms. So I don't hate them. You know, like if I grew up in an environment where only people I was ever around were fellow conservatives, I would just be a different person. It would just be inevitable. I'd have to be an extraordinary person to not be gravitating constantly to an extreme. And I think that's just the way human beings work, and that's why we have to be in these institutions.
All right, let's go back over here. I can't quite see with the light, but let's head over there. Then we'll go to the sides next.
Thank you for your characteristically cogent, compelling remarks. Before I adhere to protocol and ask a question, two quick asides I don't think you'll object to. First of all, with respect to our moderator, if you truly knew back in April that Trump was going to win the election, I was curious if you had a pick on the upcoming Kentucky Derby or knew when you're next going to Vegas.
The sad truth is I'm a horrible prognosticator. This is a rare correction one.
Right. Modesty won't get you anywhere. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say with respect to Mr. French's comments was it strikes me the one word you didn't use, which underscores much of what you had to say tonight, was the word courage, courage of one's convictions. And a corollary of that, it seems to me, and perhaps you might take issue with this, I don't think you will, is that people of faith have an easier time standing up for their convictions by virtue of the fact that they're accountable to a transcendent God as opposed to other people. Anyway, that being said, my question is this. You mentioned the word polarization, and that perfectly describes the Republican Party and more generally the conservative state of affairs at the moment. It's very sad to me as a die-in-the-wool conservative that there seems to be this binary process right now, the schism, if you will, going on in the Republican
All right,
Party.
I love you, but you're getting dangerously close. Let's get to the question.
How do you assess the Trump presidency now in view of the Gorsuch nomination, very conservative cabinet picks and so forth, as opposed to how you did pre-November?
All right, so what do you think of Trump now versus when you wanted to beat him in an election?
Okay, well, there's a couple of areas where he's been far better than I feared, far better than I even hoped. And Gorsuch is the obvious answer. You know, that was, and here's where people don't realize, so that's a double victory. That one belonged to Trump and to Mitch McConnell, because McConnell held firm in all of the pressure to give Merrick Garland a vote. And he held firm even though all the chattering classes were calling him a monster, essentially, for denying the Supreme Court justice's vote. But then he had to get he knew he was going to have to use the nuclear option to get the next nominee confirmed once Trump won. The Democrats were going to filibuster. Well, here's where Trump comes in, and this is a lot of credit goes to the Federalist Society here for helping Trump pick the right person. The only way you're going to get some of these Republican senators to sign on to a nuclear option is if the nominee is so good that a filibuster has no merit. And when you got Neil Gorsuch, who, and this is no slam on any other, any Roberts or Alito, but he's probably one of the best, probably the best Supreme Court nominee of my adult lifetime. Makes it easier to justify the nuclear option. Because if you're going to block Neil Gorsuch, we just might as well call it a day, because he's, one of the best. That's like putting forward the Michael Jordan of the court, and then the Bulls not drafting him, So that was a huge twin victory. And then here's the other one that I think is really huge, and people just flat out don't comprehend the magnitude of this. And this was the General Mattis selection for Secretary of Defense. Now, there's a lot of people who say Trump selected him only because his nickname was Mad Dog. I don't care, okay? I don't care. He selected Mattis. Why does that matter so much? The President of the United States has more authority in foreign affairs and military policy than the founders, frankly, ever envisioned a president having. And the presidents have for years been very free in using that authority, even to start wars without going to Congress. I mean, Obama did that. So if you're going to have that level of authority, and Trump has never held political office, he doesn't know anything about military affairs, and he selects as Secretary of Defense probably the most respected warrior in America, that's extremely powerful. That's an extremely, I think, reassuring move. And you're already seeing the effects of the Mattis effect. Trump has a really good story to tell about the ramp up of the war on terror right now, and he needs to tell that. So you're already seeing that. So in that sense, there's a couple of, and then, you know, I thought Michael Flynn was horrible as a national security advisor choice, but then he goes to H.R. McMaster, who's one of the most courageous and forward-thinking military officers of his generation. So these are all to the good. Then, okay, don't get me started on some of this other stuff. The rollout of the travel ban. Are you kidding me? I mean, really. You know, the incompetence of it is breathtaking. And and I supported the travel ban fundamental policy, and I wrote in support of that fundamental policy. But the rollout was just unbelievable. Bad execution can annihilate good policy. And then, you know, really, guys, the tweeting matters. You know, I know that we in the conservative world like to say, oh, it's just tweets, it's just tweets, it's just tweets. But, you know, when you're tweeting about North Korea, and you're saying, well, by golly, we'll fix it, or whatever he's saying in a very belligerent way, Kim Jong-un is not necessarily so sophisticated as to say, well, it's just tweets, it's just what he does. You know, you just got to ignore it. You know, that kind of stuff. Hopefully he'll get better, and there are times when he's gotten better. And he's done things better, and he has that ability, and he even joked towards the end of the campaign, well, I didn't, you know, they wouldn't let me tweet for 10 days. And so that matters, and look, honestly, telling the truth matters. We just got to have an administration that tells the truth. You know, I know
nice change.
I know it. I know we want to win. Let's just also tell the truth.
So we'll do one more question, and we'll go to Leo, and then Eric, give me the nod. One more question. Do we have time for more? Where are we at?
One more.
All right, one more, Leo. You're the guy. All of you who didn't get your question, I was supposed to go to the sides, and I spaced out. I'm sorry. But we'll make sure that David hangs out here near the stage so he can come up and ask the question, and never let him get to his hotel room and get a good night's
Yeah, I'm
sleep.
happy to hang out after. So
Yes.
All right, David, you say that a good First Amendment lawyer should never lose a case against
not never, but usually win.
But, you know, a lot of these cases are open and shut, but what is the result? A lot of times the result is a judgment against the college and maybe some attorney's fees, but there's no personal liability. Nothing is going to change unless there is some personal liability civilly, and I would like to see criminally, against these administrators, professors who violate every day students' First Amendment rights. So what can Congress do to rectify this situation? And First Amendment rights should not be a partisan issue. Unfortunately, today it is. What could Congress do to rectify the situation to make things better?
Preach it, brother, first on your observation that here, let me just put this into context. I've sued a bunch of universities. It is very difficult to get damages for violation of a First Amendment right. So what's the monetary value of not being able to speak? Courts have essentially said it's not really, it's indeterminate. I had a case where we won a jury trial where a professor had been denied a promotion because of his conservative point of view. First jury trial that I'm aware of in this country where we had won a jury trial holding that a university had denied a promotion to a conservative professor because of politics. The 7 years of lost income of losing that promotion because professors don't make that much was not a big number at all. There wasn't deterrence there. But if somebody trips over a crack in the sidewalk of a university, they could be staring at a 7-figure judgment. So there's literally more of a financial pressure to keep the sidewalks safe than to maintain the marketplace of ideas. And then also, when you consider the on-campus activism and how strong the on-campus activism is, there's more of universities will press forward with losing cases just because it's worth more to them to fight the case and build the credibility with the radicals in their campus than it costs them to lose the case. That's how bad it is. And so, yes, there is something Congress can do. Virtually every one of these universities is completely dependent upon federal funding. And this was a tweet that Trump sent out after Berkeley canceled Milo's speech, deny federal funding. Well, he didn't have the ability to do that because there's no statute that enables that. But what I would like to see is a statute that says, and I've advocated this off and on for some time, if a university is found guilty in a final adjudication of violating the fundamental constitutional rights, the free speech rights or religious liberty rights of its students, it is denied an X number, a certain percentage of its federal dollars, period, immediately. If it's found guilty again, it loses it all. So in other words, protecting, look, when you are a public official, and guess what a public university professor is? A public official. If you're a dean of students, you're a public official. If you're running the LGBTQ center on campus, you're a public official. You know what is job one of every public official in the United States of America in this constitutional republic? Protecting and preserving the Constitution of the United States. And so if a university fails at job one, why did they deserve a dime of taxpayer money? And so you can do that, you will catch people's attention. But you will see enormous pushback from the left against anything like that, because what they know is they'll look at what's happened in the last 5-10 years and see judgment after judgment from hated, awful, horrible conservative constitutional lawyers like me, and they say, well, we can't let them run this school. But let the First Amendment dictate. Let the First Amendment dictate. So you're exactly right, and there is something we can do. Do we have the will to do it? I have no idea.
Well, on that note, I would like to suggest all of you go to National Review online and read David and his colleagues every day. If you want to support the work, National Review Institute is a fine place to do that. He's a senior fellow there. And the huge mortgage payment out of Columbia, Tennessee requires support of National Review Institute. So please do that. And how about a round of applause for David, who was outstanding.
Well, let me say thanks to you guys. You guys are in, I think, is this 90% of Chicago conservatives? You guys are doing fantastic work in your own worlds in a hostile environment, and I thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. We are adjourned.